Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martin Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Wātea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora, Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. Welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martin Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's What Does Labour Need to Do to Win Special? The political panel all-stars tonight are Labour Party MP for Manurewa, Arena Williams, former Labour Minister and current Māori Party President John Tamihere, and Council of Trade Unions economist Craig Renney. Tonight's 1-on-1 in 10 is Labour Party leader Chris Hipkins. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Chewy from BHN moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. Your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to our Wātea Facebook, Rover and Sky TV whānau, and our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn and Jamie Dowley, and they will be arguing online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, this week Prime Minister Chris Luxon officially identified as non-spinary over the escalating carnival of war crimes that Gaza has mutated into. The Prime Minister acknowledges Netanyahu is bonkers, that famine is occurring and that what Israel is doing is disproportionate, but he still won't make a stand because ACT is so pro-Israel and are forcing him to stall. David Seymour has built an illegal settlement on the Prime Minister's balls, and we all have to pretend that's an independent foreign policy. Meanwhile, Israel just blew up a hospital, killing 20, including 5 journalists. Israel's official response to their latest double-tap war crime? Oops! We'll investigate that. To date, Israel has killed 60,000 plus the 10,000 trapped under rubble plus the up to 186,000 who have died from indirect causes created when you blow up every hospital. That's almost 250,000 Palestinians dead. Those are American military industrial levels of war crime. I mean, we'll all love to read this report on the latest hospital bombing atrocity, but I think Israel might find the current mountain of dead civilians hard to ignore when they start investigating just one incident. Mr. Luxon, 5 words: kick Israeli ambassador out now. And finally, in this week's War on News, here are some global news headlines that 7 Sharp might have missed this week. Deadly Nordic heat wave made 10 times worse by climate change. Experts say to expect more frequent extreme weather events, and African heat waves are hotter and longer than 40 years ago. It's almost like the planet is melting and we have our heads in the sand. Whatever the climate change problem, the New Zealand solution is always more cows. Brothers and sisters, we're all going to die on a burning planet thanks to the lies of the petrol industrial complex and their polluter mates. To quote the great warrior poet oracle Mike Hosking, happy days. The political panel all-stars are up shortly, whānau, but first, this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Good to talk to you, Bomber, as always.
Chippy, let's get into it. Penny got a spanking by the mainstream media this week over a personal view on the gang patch ban. I was at the marae watching the debate, and I took Penny's response as an eye roll to the virtue signal that is the gang patch ban. One of the many things that pisses me off, Chippy, is the way the right falsely framed the law and order debate by claiming Labour is soft on crime. Phil Goff always used to say Labour is tough on crime and tougher on the causes of crime. Labour invested into the off-ramps for people to turn away from crime with wraparound services that have all been gutted by this government. We know the gang patch ban is a virtue signal because there are more gang members than ever before. The meth testing in our water is through the roof. National are keen to make the problem invisible. Labor actually focus on why people commit crime in the first place. How does National keep getting away with revenge fantasies rather than actual social policy?
The reality is tough on crime rhetoric is the easy part. Preventing crime from happening in the first place requires a lot more thought, a lot more action, and it's something that the government, the current government, National Act, New Zealand First, don't seem to have any real answers to. There are answers there if they look for them. They choose to instead hide behind slogans rather than solutions.
Academic research shows us 80 to 90% of gang members were abused in state care. If we want less gang members, stop abusing kids in state care. What am I missing here, Chippy?
Well, we did some work when I was Minister of Police for that brief period of time around the kids who were involved in ram raids.
Right.
And we found that something like 90% of those kids had someone living in their household who had been in prison or who had otherwise been involved in the justice system. Now, that was the hardcore group of offenders. So I'm not saying that covered every kid who was getting hooked into that, but the kids who were at the core of it, it was a cycle that was repeating. When we put real effort around those families to break that cycle, 75% of those kids stopped reoffending.
Right.
There are answers there if the government look for what the evidence tells them rather than just going with slogans.
Let's move on to the economy. And National's plan after their slash and burn economic vandalism is to sell citizenships to 215 gold visa multi-millionaires, change the overseas investment rules to allow those new multi-millionaire citizens to buy residential property, and the Prime Minister just breached the independence of the Reserve Bank, all to inflate a speculative property bubble. Is that the best economic growth plan that National, ACT and New Zealand First can create? A speculative housing bubble? Has Nicola Willis taken our economy to market and sold it for 3 free market magic beans?
I can understand why New Zealanders are feeling really let down by this government. It's important for us all to remember they said they were going to fix the economy,
right,
that there was going to be nothing to it. They were just going to bring a more business-like approach to it, and everything was going to get better. The cost of living was going to be fixed. Jobs were going to somehow miraculously appear out of the sky. Everything was going to get better. And instead, New Zealanders' real experience has been that everything's gotten worse.
Right. The government this week announced a fake consultation into lowering the capital requirements for the banking industry. How come the banks get cuddles while we all get sticks, and is now really the time to be rushing through capital requirements when there is so much global instability?
It's another great example of the government's rhetoric not being matched with its action. They're turning governing the country into a big game of Simon Says. You know, listen to what I say, not what I do. Because the truth here is that, you know, they're making the situation worse. They're giving the banks exactly what they want. They were all talking tough on the banks.
Right.
And now they've basically said to the banks, oh, actually, it turns out it's all the government's fault.
Let's move on to Auckland and Wellington, who have been smashed to bits by this government's policies. Prime Minister Luxon says hope is on the way for Auckland and Wellington, but he's been promising growth since January. So why should Wellingtonians and Aucklanders believe the Prime Minister now?
I can understand why Aucklanders in particular feel betrayed by this government. They said they were going to fix everything, and Auckland's been hit amongst the hardest in the country,
right,
in terms of people losing their jobs. I don't think Aucklanders saw that coming when they voted for this government, and I think they have every right to feel really let down and really disappointed.
How on earth will upgrading the wharf so the bloated swine palace cruise ships have nicer access, how is that a real solution to Auckland's economic woes? Dumping a whole host of rich cruise ship tourists into a downtown gridlocked by construction and strewn with the homeless is going to benefit some of the luxury shops at the bottom of the Queen Street, but that's it. Where's the meaningful growth we were promised?
Tourism is an important part of our economy.
Oh, sure, but that can't be a solution. Yeah.
It's not the be-all and end-all of the economy. And bear in mind that, you know, major events, which often bring tourists into the country, have pretty much dried up now, and the government don't seem to want to do anything about that. It's got to be, New Zealand's got to be more than selling houses to each other and attracting tourists from overseas. We
Right?
actually have to have industry in New Zealand that's creating jobs. We've got to have businesses that are creating jobs. We've got to back our innovators who want to create good jobs for New Zealanders. This government is silent on all of that. If they were really going for growth, they would have come up with a plan by now.
The government this week found 2.7 billion for military attack helicopters while cutting 30 million from 236 social contract providers to Oranga Tamariki. Is that a calculation we would ever see from a Labour-led government?
I think the way those Oranga Tamariki providers have been treated has been absolutely disgraceful.
Right.
Some of those providers didn't even find out they were losing funding until after their previous contracts had expired. They kept employing their staff in good faith, thinking it's okay, it's just a matter of, renewing the contract with the government, only to find the government say retrospectively, effectively, sorry, we're cancelling your contract. And so all that expenditure you've incurred in the meantime, that's on you, that's your problem to deal with. I think that's absolutely abysmal. No government entities should operate in that way. And it shows the bad choices this government are making. They think that tax cuts for landlords is more important than vulnerable kids.
I think that increasingly, Chippy, people are looking at your leadership and they're putting it up against Luxon's, and they're seeing Luxon make a bunch of decisions that I just don't think you, as someone who has been a public servant, someone who's dedicated their life to New Zealand, I just don't think you'd make those. $30 million, we're cutting that, but we're finding almost $3 billion for military. There's 300 million for the tobacco companies, but we don't have 30 million for these people who are going out and looking after the most vulnerable amongst us. What does it say about a government whose focus is just completely blindsided by that, and they don't seem to actually care?
This government have made terrible choices, giving tax breaks to tobacco companies, giving tax breaks to landlords. The most recent one is a multi-million dollar, hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks to big multinational tech firms like Google and Facebook. They would not be my priorities if I was Prime Minister at the moment, and they certainly won't be my priorities after the election. I think what New Zealanders are asking for at the moment is some hope, some idea that there can be a better future. They want to get out there and work for it, but they're finding that the opportunities are drying up because this government are making such terrible decisions.
Finally, Chippy, we are hosting a special tonight on what Labour needs to do to win the next election. Will Labour consider tactical voting this election to utilise MMP to its fullest to get rid of this terrible, terrible, terrible government?
Well, of course, the greatest tactical vote that people can make if you want to change the government at the next election is to vote for Labour, because that guarantees you a change of government. And I think that's the best thing that voters can do. We're going to have a lot more to say about the next election campaign early next year as we start to roll out more policies. But I also have heard from Kiwis they don't want any more fake, false promises. They don't want any more false hope. They want to know that when we make a promise, we've done our homework and that we can deliver on it. And that is exactly what I'm totally committed to.
Tamaki Makaurau, by-election, how's it going?
Oh, Penny Henardy's doing a great job. I'm sure the bloke standing next to you might have a different interpretation.
I'm sure John will give us his opinion shortly.
but I think Penny's doing a great job. And to the voters of Tamaki Makaurau, if they want a strong voice around the next cabinet table, Penny Henardy's their man.
Thank you, comrade. We'll see you next month. Cheers, Chippy.
Cheers.
Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Our first panellist is joining us from Wellington. He's a left-wing superhero who fights for workers against the evil bosses. He's pretty much socialist Harry Potter with a lightsaber. NZCTU economist Craig Renney. Kia ora, comrade. One word to describe the week, please, sir.
I'm optimistic. There's change in the air. In Wellington, the sun is out. People are feeling different. People are feeling as if, there's new hope. I think the polling's telling us that people are looking for something different, and there's some sunny optimism here. And I think when they're looking at this government, they're looking at a government that's increasingly falling apart at the seams.
Our next panellist hails from the mighty Manurewa, voted most likely to topple capitalism by a kindergarten. Spokesperson for building and construction, spokesperson for commerce and consumer affairs, and spokesperson for youth. Labour Party MP for the Manurewa Massive, Arena Williams. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, ma'am.
Urgency. People out there need change. Things are getting worse, and National is making them worse.
Preach. And last but certainly not least, he's a lover and a fighter. But mostly a fighter. Former Talkback host, former Labour Party minister, hero who sued Mike Hosking for defamation and won. Ladies and gentlemen, the Māori Party president, John Tamihere. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia ora.
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Anything but optimism.
Ooh.
Yes, see?
Ooh, yeah.
Simple as that.
Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's What Does Labour Need to Do to Win Special Issue 1. It's the economy, stupid. How does Labour counter the neoliberal amputation of the political state? Issue 2. Can Labour win back a bitter post-COVID Auckland after National has brutalised the city? Issue 3 tonight. Is Michael Savage spinning in his grave? And what has become of the Labour Party relationship with Māoridom? Tonight we ask a clairvoyant. And issue 4 tonight. What should Labour consider in the next election? Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. All of our money is on John Tamihere. Let's begin tonight's show. What does Labour need to do to win the next election special with the economy stupid? 70,000 New Zealanders have left the country, 16,000 jobs destroyed in the construction industry, 30,000 jobs gone, 5.2% unemployment, workers' rights attacked, pay parity kneecappings, privatisation by stealth, and donors' deregulation interests given priority over the common good. To use the technical term, comrades, the economy is rooted, bro. Craig, so the government's economic plan is to manufacture a housing bubble by leaning on the Reserve Bank. How's that going to work?
It's not, is the honest answer. You are dead right. What they want to do is they want to make sure that the Reserve Bank is cutting interest rates. Everyone feels a little bit wealthier because their house price goes up. They go out, they buy a new kitchen, or they go out and they buy a new car, and then hopefully that gets the economy going. Except that's not happening. It's not working. Retail sales aren't going up at the rate that we need them to. More and more people are out of work. More and more people aren't feeling that they've got money in their pockets to go and do things. And last time I was on this show, you very kindly had me on with Sir Roger Douglas.
Right.
And when I was thinking about this question, I thought, what's the key thing that Labour needs to do? Right? And it needs to do the opposite of whatever Sir Roger Douglas would want us to do at this point in time. Right? We need to be improving worker security. We need to be making sure that wages are going up. People don't feel more secure and able to pay their mortgages because they get a tax cut. They feel more secure and able to pay their mortgages because their wages go up.
Yes.
Because they're paid more. Right? We need to be making sure that our settings on investments are right, that everyone's paying their fair share of tax, that when they need a public service, it's there for them.
Follow-up question. National are going to cause long-term damage to the public sector by locking into place contracts with the private sector that cements that spending into place.
That's right.
What does any future Labour Party do to repair that damage?
First thing it needs to do is to say right now that it will not continue with long-term, unfair, private contracts that fundamentally displace work that should be done by the public sector.
Yes.
Right? It's really straightforward. There should be no expectation under a future Labour government that we will be delivering contracts that simply work to put money in the pockets of private companies when that money could be used more effectively and more efficiently to deliver the public services that we all need. It's really straightforward stuff. We don't actually need to breach anyone's contract to not send anyone to the private sector in the future. We just don't send them there.
Arena, unemployment in Auckland is 6.1% and 11.5% for Māori. Extending a wharf for bloated swine palace cruise ships does not a summer make.
Nope.
Where's the job training programs? Where's the economic growth we were promised?
Exactly. Unemployment is rising under this government, and it's worse if you're young. 25% of young New Zealanders are out of work and out of training opportunities. When this national government stood up at the election and they said apprenticeship boost is something we can be bipartisan about, and then cut half of those apprentices, and now we've got apprentices who have gone overseas. New Zealand has funded Queensland's economic boom because of the construction industry going well over there when this government has cut cut infrastructure projects again and again. 200 school builds, 16 classrooms at my local school. Every Kiwi will see that these construction jobs are desperately needed and would be generating the jobs that we need. When the National Party is putting out a press release at the beginning of 2025 saying this is the year of growth, and yet the only thing growing is food prices and unemployment, they should stand on that record at the election and go down to a Labour with a plan.
Follow-up question. As bad as things are under this government, critics will point to a long list of failures by Labour in the doing of things, like Three Waters, light rail, Harbour Bridge bike crossing, 100,000 affordable houses, etc. The state has been underfunded by neoliberal debt straitjackets for 30 years. What structural changes would Labour actually do for the economy if they won?
There are things that we know need to be built for our cities. We need grown-up cities with infrastructure that actually deals with congestion. And National have no answer to that. Despite harking back to Auckland light rail, they have absolutely no plan to get those buses and trains working that we need to have. And there's actually so much goodwill here, Bomber, from both political parties to get that long-term infrastructure pipeline agreed to. And yet what is National doing with it?
Well, they slashed it.
They slashed it, and they've seen all of the construction workers who would be needed once the economy turns a corner, once we get these guys out, go overseas.
John, you are a former Labour minister. You were the first person to win Tamaki Makaurau as an election for Labour, and for those sins, you are now emancipated in the Māori Party.
Right.
You cannot pretend to ever cut a deal with the National Party Act or New Zealand First. So why aren't the Māori Party working with Greens and Labour on a united economic package?
Oh, look, we've tried to reach out on a number of occasions, particularly to Labour. Greens, we've got a reasonable conversation going, but it's very difficult because it's a bit like Penny will tell you. If he steps outside of the line a bit, he gets whacked back into place. I used to be there. So the problem Labour's got is that they had a chance under Ardern to be intergenerationally changing. They failed. And so what has to happen is that they have to grow a backbone. And what we're not hearing, I hear Chippy saying, wait till next year for all our policies and the nirvana will come. You just have to try and work that through somehow and understand, well, what does that mean? What does it mean? Well, wait till next year. And then all the Christmases will come at once in 2026. So I don't think a blitzkrieg of Labour Party policy announcements next year is going to cut the mustard, really. You got Tweedledum and Tweedledee leading both parties, you see.
Follow-up question. The Māori Party has some of the most progressive taxation policy amongst all the political parties. You are arguing for a range of taxes aimed at the mega-rich plus new top tax thresholds. Why not present a united front with the Greens and make economic transformation for all New Zealanders a bottom line for Labour? Help our brothers and sisters in Labour do the right thing. Can't you help Willie Jackson for once?
Oh, no, well, no, he's past redemption, but putting that to one side, and he's the brains trust they've got over there in the Māori side of the fence.
Why can't you help? Why can't you reach out and help the Labour Party?
It takes two to make up conversation. You can't be talking to a mirror. Yeah, well, but who are you? Yeah. See, who are you? It's a bit like Penny when he tries to speak his Māori truth and he gets whacked back into line for it over the gang patches. The reality is that there is a problem that Labour's got at the moment.
But aren't they more preferable to another national act in New Zealand First government?
Here's the thing. Anything's preferable.
Right.
But here's the real thing is we're here forever.
Yes.
So we'll be running a long-term game here in regard to slowly progressing and getting more progressive policies. Now, you don't have to make love with somebody just because it's 2026. Okay, if you're here for the long run and for the long game, we have 8 seats now by numbers. By 2026, there'll be enough for 9. The number of Māori enrolled in the Māori seats will be above 10% of the split. So our voter rights and democracy, we're being rorted. Okay, we deserve 9 seats coming into 26. It's just the way in which, anyway, this is all playing out
But is
in a High Court case.
Is that what Māori voters want when they vote for Te Pāti Māori, to see their 8 representatives sitting on the opposition benches in perpetuity?
Well, it goes like this. If you follow the Green movement, they sat in perpetuity for years and years and years. Sometimes it takes time for a movement to run on.
People don't have time.
No, it's the opposition.
They're hurting right now.
No. People over that side of the fence, Labour, have to learn how to count. Politics is all about understanding the count.
Craig, it's not a case of capital gains tax or wealth tax. Labor need both taxes if they are serious about funding the public service in the way Labor are promising. Why aren't you, as NZCTU economists, spearheading the argument that we need both?
Well, one of the things we've looked at as a CTU, we've had a really deep look at tax, and we've discovered there's one secret trick about tax, right? Stop giving it away. We keep cutting tax for various groups. We've given away over 2 budgets, $23 billion in tax. When someone says there isn't money available for the health service or for nurses, there isn't money for a pay rise for teachers, there isn't money for a pay rise for firefighters, for God's sake, right? There is money. We've just chosen to give it away. When we say there's no money to help deliver, the jobs in places like Tokoroa that have seen massive employment change, guess what? There is. We've just chosen to give it to Facebook or to Google, right? The key thing about tax is actually what people care about is not how you generate the money, right? It's important, but it's actually what you're doing with it, right? And that's the key thing for the next Labour government, is to marry whatever it does in terms of tax into delivering great outcomes in health, in education, in housing, because those are the things that make a difference. Most people on the streets don't really care about sort of the minutiae of whether or not a capital gains tax or a wealth tax or a land tax or anything else tax, right, and how it works. What they want to know is actually that the public services that they use are well funded and are there when they need them, and that they're not seeing their money given away to the top end of town,
the tobacco industry, for Christ's sakes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Arena, I'm not looking for socialism from Labor, just basic regulated capitalism. Will a Labor government do anything meaningful, not incremental, meaningful, about the rigged electricity market, the supermarket duopoly, and the broken housing market? Surely time is now.
The time is now, and people want to see real action on the cost of living. That's why we are prioritising it. The electricity market has been dominated by gentailers, which have been rent-seeking and then sending big dividends overseas. We know there needs to be change there. In terms of the supermarket duopoly, it was Labour's work that started the Commerce Commission.
And it was good. It was good.
And we need to keep pushing out on that. Where is the government's announcement on their supermarket policy? We've been promised that they have gone through a system where they've asked industry, please, industry, what would you like? What would it take to get a third entrant in here?
And nothing.
Nothing. It's been, I think, about 150 days and we're still waiting. Labor's got policy to announce, and I'm excited that you're interested in it, Bomber, and I'll be back on your show telling you about it.
It's all I care about, goddamn it. I'm such a geek. John, critics argue the Māori Party isn't interested in government and that they prefer to gloat in opposition. I think Sean Plunkett said that.
Yes.
For those whānau doing it tough under this anti-Māori government, can you tell them the Māori Party are prepared to enter any arrangement that will see the end of this anti-treaty government?
Well, of course we will. But everybody has terms.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reality is that Labor has to grow a backbone. Look, it had the chance to regulate the banking regime here, gave up the inquiry into it. The Aussies carried their inquiry on and did what they had to do. They even capped credit card rates, right? That's an easy one right here. Now, right, 21% today. Yeah, they've capped them.
Yeah.
Right now, if you don't have a backbone and you don't have a government that's going to take on the Australian banks, and I'm just using the banks as one proxy for a debate about all duopolies, cartels, if you please, and the like. And so if you're not going to take on the financiers, the very first start, well, you got some problems, right? You can, in the tax, I disagree with the Economist. The reality is that the tax debate isn't about what you do with the money. that flows through. What happened with this present government is it gave all the money to the top end of town.
Jesus, did it
Now,
what?
well, when it does, it doesn't come back into the economy.
No,
If
no.
you gave it to the middle class, it fires up the whole economy.
Yes.
The other thing is that I did want to make about those numbers on unemployment is if you took into account net immigration,
Yes.
it'd be through the roof.
Right.
Okay, so the
right.
numbers are all cooked.
Yeah.
And there's a whole. We've talked about underemployment as
Yes.
well, and just one number, it's 4,378 kids, 14 to 18, Māori, not in education, skills, employment, or anywhere.
Too many.
Now that's just now in South Auckland,
Yeah.
you triple that.
Yeah.
So, and that's just 14 to 18.
Yeah.
So we everyone knows that problem's there. Both major parties know it's there. No programs, nothing other than send them to the gangs.
Quick round to all of you. This is a quote from Matthew Hooton today. Imagine Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister. She goes on a generally friendly media outlet for a weekly chat. Despite not being under any particular pressure by the interviewer, she ends up saying that she meets privately with the Governor of the Reserve Bank before official cash rate decisions and gives her reckons or views or perspectives on what the Monetary Policy Committee should decide. What then happens in the media and political worlds? Who would scream fascist first? A. Mike Hosking. B. Sean Plunkett. C. Heather Duplessis-Allen. D. Damien Grant. E. Jordan Williams. F. Peter Williams. G. The Taxpayers Union. H. Federated Farmers. I. Groundswell. Or J. All of the above. Craig.
All of the above, and they should, is the honest answer. And what we've heard from Christopher Luxon is as close to. I've got no idea what he was thinking.
Jesus.
I genuinely don't. This is pretty basic 101 stuff. There is an independent reserve bank. Let's beyond the politics of all of this, right?
Oh.
This is messing with our credit rating.
Right.
This is
right.
messing with our ability to pay for stuff. There's a whole bunch of things that you go, hang on a second. You do not mess in this area for really good reasons, right?
Right.
What's really worrying about this is we right now have a temporary governor. We don't actually have a permanent governor.
Right.
And the temporary governor might wish to apply for the job of permanent governor. And how then does that look as if the permanent governor was previously taking instructions from the Prime Minister if there's then a change in government?
Exactly.
We deliberately keep these things separate. It's really important. And when I heard it, I was agog. As someone who sat in rooms with the Reserve Bank governor, and they've been very clear about boundaries, lines, what can be communicated, what can't be communicated, right? This is really amateur hour stuff from a Prime Minister.
This was nutty,
The
wasn't it?
National Party cupboard of ideas is bare, Bomber. They've got a problem on their
on the
hands.
Reserve Bank governor now and
That's
going,
it.
here's my reckons. What is he doing?
Here's my reckons, please supercharge the economy for me because it's down the toilet.
Right.
This is some desperate stuff from the Prime Minister, and when leadership is required to make sure that the cost of living is under control, that people can have faith in a pipeline of work, where businesses have the confidence they need to invest, and where people know that they are going to have a job in 6 months' time. That's what the economy means to people, right? And so if we've got a Prime Minister going to the Reserve Bank and giving his reckons in this way, it points to the larger problem here where we've got the National Party not able to make up its mind. Is Chris Bishop right when he says that house prices should come down? Is the Prime Minister right when he says house prices should inflate? We're back to a situation where the only idea we've got is a housing bubble to heat things up.
John, he's just trying to manufacture a housing bubble, isn't he? That's what they've got as an economic plan.
Hey, look, have a look at who runs the state services at the moment. He didn't apply for that job. He was appointed.
Right.
So he's just a typical National Party hitman, right? So he's policing the rest of the public service in regard to what they can and can't do. And God, that woman Collins, what a real ugly little evil person in all ways, even the way she's starting to look. So when you start to go through the whole of that side of the political right wing, they've got major problems. Nothing's going to lift in 2026. Normally, what used to happen is that if there were major OCR cuts and coming back down, it would lift confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, see, you can't have confidence when the whole place is being depowered.
Yeah.
And no longer is the OCR weaponised to the extent that it could be to lift the economy, because there are multiple other things that this government's done, which has depowered a whole range of things.
Yeah.
Now, firing them back up takes a lot more than it's going to get to 2026.
Right.
So it's not going to be good. I'll tell you what, budget 2026 in May of 2026, it's going to be a ripper in regard to what the numbers will be saying, where the economy is going and where it's not going. So 2026 is going to be a ripper of an election.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that's the decimation of Auckland and Wellington thanks to this government's policies. Auckland Chamber of Commerce Pope Simon Bridges says urgent government action is needed to save Auckland's struggling economy. Homelessness is exploding, infrastructure is groaning, and hundreds of thousands need food banks monthly. Chris Luxon has said, "Don't worry, Auckland, I'm going to build a bigger wharf for cruise ships." I don't know. Auckland took the hit over the last COVID lockdown so the rest of the country could get immunised. We felt Labour's GST or fruit and vegetables didn't recognise our collective sacrifice at all, and Auckland turned coldly on Labour, including the middle-class suburbs who voted Green instead. Should Auckland have been thanked and recognised for their COVID sacrifice, and what has Labour learned?
That's why Labour spent a year really carefully listening to New Zealanders about why we lost support in some of those areas.
Yeah.
And I think what we have learned is that we need to treat Aucklanders with the respect about and actually telling what their money is being spent on. And
Yes.
it's a mistake that the government is making right now with road user charges.
Yes.
They're telling Aucklanders that this is going to be a solution for congestion and for the infrastructure that Auckland needs. That's just levying people.
It's a
not
privatisation of the roading system, isn't it?
That's right, and it's not actually telling them what is going to be built, because there's no long-term plan here for how we're actually going to deal with congestion. A couple of motorways that are roads of National Party significance, like Mill Road, are not going to solve this city's transport woes.
John, this week, just across the road from us, a newborn infant died in Albert Park at the centre of Auckland. This is 2025. Shouldn't we collectively be ashamed that happened?
Oh, not only that. Third world diseases coming back amongst infants, measles, etc. Immunisation rates have fallen right through the floor, particularly in our communities.
Yeah.
And numbers have been cooked by this mob, right? So not only have they taken the stick to the public service, they're now starting to manipulate what they actually say, do, etc. Because otherwise you all get beat up. So you've got this whole problem in the whole of government where you've got this bully boy mentality. You step out of line. Any academic that wants to provide an alternative economic opinion is beat up, right? No, this is worse than Nazi Germany. This is a fascist regime that has to be removed. So our problem isn't just about those babies. This isn't going away.
Yeah,
it's actually getting worse. Tama Pōtaka is a disgrace to our Māori race. Okay, he sits there, says nothing, makes up stories. We've got the worst social housing problem out. Exited people out into the gutter in a winter.
Yeah,
that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
Unacceptable conduct.
Craig, fundamentally, Auckland Council can't get more debt to build the infrastructure that 3 decades of mass immigration policies from National and Labour have contributed to. How would the next Labour government provide new direct funding to Auckland infrastructure?
I mean, it's a great question, Bubba. One of the questions you've raised there essentially is what's going to be the new engine of growth? Because the engine for growth for Auckland for the past 2-3 decades has been essentially house price growth and migration.
Right.
It's really easy to grow the economy by 2% when there are 2% more customers every year. But what are you actually going to do, right? How are you actually going to solve the real problems in Auckland? Housing, right? We need to build lots more housing in Auckland. There's lots of housing that's third world, to John's point. You know, it's not only third world diseases that we get in New Zealand. We've stopped collecting statistics on a whole range of areas, which means we just don't know.
Yeah.
We stopped collecting information on the number of households in energy poverty because it was no longer convenient. to know that number, right? And to Adana's point earlier, which was exactly the right one, we need to show some leadership here, right? And actually say, what are we going to do that's going to deliver some good, long-term, sustainable jobs in Auckland? Unemployment, as you say, is 6.1%, but it's 12.2% in the Pacifica community.
Right.
It's 10% across the Māori community, right? There are large concentrations of urban unemployment in Auckland that need good long-term sustainable solutions to them and need long-term investment plans. We're not seeing any of that from this government. And one of the things we actually need to see delivered is not only the council being able to invest more in the future, but building state housing.
Yeah.
Right? We've stopped.
Yeah.
Right? How are we making sure we're delivering? Auckland is short of 2 hospitals for population change. Where are they coming from?
Yeah.
And if we had those, we perhaps have 16,000 more construction workers in New Zealand than have left over the past 2 years. There's a body of work to do. This is actually really straightforward stuff, because right now we have a New Zealander leaving the country every 7 minutes and 24 seconds.
Jesus.
A New Zealand passport holder, right? Leaving the country every 7 minutes, 24 seconds. This is really easy. Just, give people the stuff and a reason to be here, right? And they will stay.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is the relationship between the Māori Party and the Labour Party and Māoridom, cemented into place by the Ratana Church. Michael Savage was gifted a potato, a broken gold watch, a punamu and a huia feather as symbols of that new alliance. The potato represented loss of Māori land and means of sustenance. The broken watch represented the broken promises of the treaty, and the punamu represented the mana of the Māori people. The idea was that if Savage was able to restore those 3, he would earn the right to wear the huia feather. John, is it time for Labour to earn that huia feather with a new political pact with Māoridom through the Māori Party?
Well, let's talk about the history first. The Ratana Pact is over and done with. Okay.
Do we need Ratana too?
No,
That's what I'm putting to you.
Well, look, yeah, but you need somebody growing up enough on the other side that doesn't see you as a subaltern, a supplicant, a lesser than. So when you've got somebody that can talk to you on as equals, not on equals in terms of the numbers that you bring to the game, but in terms of humanity terms, treaty partners, well, then we've got a different conversation. But if they just see you as, no, you're too radical for me, when we speak our truth, well, then you're no good for us either, right?
Craig, there is something to like in the parliamentary review on banking in terms of Māori. The report includes lending to Māori asset holders, organisations, businesses and individuals, set voluntary Māori banking service standards, remove anti-money laundering roadblocks for Māori land trusts, enable Māori co-investment in infrastructure, create Māori-focused lending products. What more could Labour do to help strengthen the economic infrastructure of Māoridom?
Well, first things first, we should stop binning the strategies and the documents and the plans that we had already. So there was a Māori Employment Action Plan. A lot of work went into it. Trade unions were involved in its development. Iwi were involved in its development. This government comes to office, binned.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing replaces it. We had Hekaike Akuringa, the Māori Economic Development Strategy. Right? Binned. Nothing replaces it. Right? There was no money for Māori housing. It was all taken away so that housing funding no longer had any race-based elements.
Right.
Right? Nonsense. Right? We have giant needs because Māori commonly held land. You can't lend money against it because the bank can't take an ownership interest. Right? It creates a huge roadblock to the development of commonly held land, of iwi land. We used to have funds to help deliver those programs. They've all gone. So many of the challenges that we need to help deliver and deliver new economic growth, particularly through post-settlement entities, we need to with those actors. The Māori economy is now in asset $120 billion right now, up from $50 billion just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right? We need to be working more closely with them and creating opportunities for public partnerships.
Right.
Not public-private partnerships, but public partnerships, where we're working together to deliver the welfare solutions that we all need.
Right.
We're working together to deliver the infrastructure that we all need. Those will actually help sustainably grow the Māori economy, create Māori jobs. And importantly, in Auckland, working with actors, there to actually make sure we're delivering the training, the development, because right now no one is doing that work in Auckland, and we need that desperately.
Arena, the Māori economy, just as Craig was pointing out, valued at 120 billion.
Yeah.
But this government seems to gain more political value from bashing Māori rather than working with them. What more could Labour do?
You know, I spoke with some students in Hineahuone at the University of Auckland yesterday alongside Pini Henare, and I look at these young people who were born at the turn of the millennium, and I hope that when we are together in 2040, celebrating 200 years of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and acknowledging that peppered history of colonisation and of an extractive economy, that those young people see this little part of our history as a blip. This attack on Te Reo Māori, this attack on Te Ao Māori. And so I'll fight my corner on that any day with you, John Tamihere. You know, these young people who expect better and know that this is not as good as it gets for Māori, they need a government that respects them and will fight for them. In that banking inquiry, I fought my corner on that every day with National Party MPs who wanted to deprioritise those Māori banking requirements, who wanted to say that, you know, findings about infrastructure and iwi development were not something that belonged in a banking inquiry. This is the key recommendation of that inquiry, to make sure that the Māori economy isn't capital constrained and isn't fighting for funding with foreign-owned entities who are getting the red carpet rolled out for them under this national government. But to do that, you need to be in government. You want to be a winner.
Quick round. There is a faction within Labour concerned the Māori Party are too radical and that a deal with New Zealand First is preferable. What do you say to that faction, Craig?
I say to that faction, we have one job, and that is to win the next election. And that's the only thing that's actually important right now. And that involves getting as many Labour MPs into seats as is possible at the next election, and to make sure we have a truly progressive government in office next time round. The infighting can wait, right? That's one of the nice things you can do when you're in office. Right now, the important thing is we have 156,900 children living in material poverty in this country, and that number's going up. Right? We're saving $1 billion from stopping people getting access to emergency housing, and we're all seeing on-street homelessness explode across the country. Let's tackle that. Right? Let's not form a basis about hypothetical conversations about who's going to be working with who in the future. The only thing that's important right now is to get this mob out.
Labour is best and it is strongest when it is fighting for every vote and when it's trying to govern for everyone.
But you can't get a deal with Winston. Come on. Well, he's crazy.
We need to go after Winston Peters voters. We need to reconnect with those people.
Yes. What do you say? I mean, because there's a saying, well, if the Māori Party going to be too radical, we'll go cut a deal with Winston.
Yeah, but see, lots of Pākehās say that anyway. It doesn't matter. Remember when Tariana first founded Te Pāti Māori? Yeah. Worst radical Māori in the country.
Yes.
Had to hide under a seat because Helen Clark asked her to. So, you know, the ugliness of that doesn't change. Hone Harawira, same. Yep. Ugly little Hori, right? See, if you're running a pro-Māori, not anti-Pākehā, but a pro-Māori view, you're immediately tagged as a radical. Now, here's the real issue. We are obliged to stand in general seats. I'll be standing in Carlson against Sepuloni, so on and so forth. So we're standing. We'll give it. We'll fight our corner. We'll fight our fight. When the dust settles, as Mr. Renney says, we'll just see who's standing.
Last issue tonight, comrades, and that is the MMP tactics Labour should use to win the 2026 election. Craig, if this government is so terrible, why aren't the Greens, Māori Party and Labour Party meeting now to discuss a grand strategy for 2026?
Well, Craigie, that's a question you'd have to ask them. I'm not privy to those conversations.
Shouldn't you be? God damn it!
Yeah, I know. One of the things I would tell you is that there's a real need for that concerted effort, real need to make sure that we're all presenting, a united front. But that united front isn't about, being against each other. It has to be about against this government.
Yes.
Pointing out all the mistakes this government has made, pointing out all of the things that it's doing, the fact that it's hurting communities not just in Auckland, but right up and down the country.
Yeah.
We've just seen the closure of a mill on the top of the South Island that thought it had years to go, right?
Yeah.
And that's been caused by energy costs. It's being caused by the fact that that company can take those profits overseas, right? We need to be building that better economy, giving people a collective vision of something that's better for the future, right? And I think if we do that, we'll be in a really good place in 2026, because this is not a popular government, and it's certainly not a popular leader in Christopher Luxon.
Elena, the right have ZB, NZME, the New Zealand Initiative, the Billionaire Class, the Atlas Network, the New Zealand Herald, the TVNZ Board, Luke Mulpass at Stuff, the Taxpayers Union, Free Speech Union, the Campaign Company, Groundswell, Federated Farmers, and all the left have is Craig Renney from the NZCTU.
He's a good friend.
6 weeks out before the next election, which is always too late. Does the right just want it more because we on the left seem more focused on cancelling one another than beating the rich?
Oh, there's good money in it for them. No, look, you're right. We need allies, and the Labour Party does well when it has its friends out with it campaigning. I mean, to run a big campaign like the one you're seeing in Tāmaki Makaurau, where volunteers are coming out, these are mums and dads who are giving up their time. They don't have $100 to give us, let alone the $50,000 that some National Party donors were handing over at the last election. But they do have time. That's why volunteers in the Labour Party are going out and knocking on doors and using the phones to get in touch with people. That's what you'll see from the Labour Party, chasing down every vote. And that's when we're best. We're best at talking about what Labour Party values are, about working people and about making their lives better.
Not 300 million for the tobacco industry.
Not that one.
Preach. John, if Labour and the Māori Party agreed to work together in the Māori electorates with a Māori Party electorate vote and a Labour Party vote strategy, you could create a 6-seat overhang that would lock into place a Labour Māori Green government for a decade. For a decade. Why won't you openly engage Labour in this strategy? A decade.
Well, you're presuming that conversation hasn't been asked for and had.
What's going on? What's a haps?
Well, go and ask Arena and the Labour Party people. All I can say, I'll give you the documentation. Hang on. Straight after this, I'll give it to you, the documentation to you. You can load it.
But we're talking a decade, wouldn't it? A 6-seat overhang. If the left used MMP the way the right does.
Yeah, we all know how to count.
Right?
Look, National, even that hated act from 96 to 2008.
They cut them that deal every single election,
kept giving them seats.
Didn't they?
Yeah, all the rest of it. So that's it. The Greens have to fight their corner against Labour. Māori Party has to. So that's how Labour plays the game. That's okay. Let's see where the dust settles.
But we're talking a decade. We could lock in a decade of Green Māori Labour government.
The day the treaty was signed, it was broken and we were corralled into the poor parts of this country from the get-go. There's only one people that are going to break us out of that. Ain't going to be the Parkers and the Labour Party or the Parkers elsewhere. Be us.
Comrade, a quick round to everyone. Can Labour, Greens and Māori Party present a united front in time for the 2026 election? Craig?
Yes, and importantly, they have to. And importantly, we have to have the same message, and it's one message, and it's to get this government.
Preach, Arena.
Yeah. And a lot of that work happens behind the scenes as well, to make sure that we do have policy that we are taking out there to the people who need us. They desperately need us to be working together on some big issues, and we can do that.
John, tell me there's hope. Tell me a brighter tomorrow, a Labour, Green, Māori Party government's possible. Tell me.
No, it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely possible on the polls.
It is. Yeah. Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. John, your final word this week, please, sir.
Oh, I think whilst Penny is a very good candidate, I just think Orini's on fire everywhere. Takes the oxygen out of the room, the energy in the debates. So
she had a great debate.
Oh no, outstanding. She's outstanding, and I just great mana wahine, and wish her all the best.
Māori Dima the winner on the day in that debate. Craig, your final word this week, please, sir.
Is delay. We've seen in the last RBNZ forecasts, the recovery is delayed again. Over the past 6 months, the date when we go back to recovery starting has gone back exactly 6 months. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The problem is the tunnel just keeps getting longer. And so our challenge is that when we look at the National Party looking at the future, right? Looking at the polling. If I was a National Party list MP right now, I would be worried because that recovery is not coming back to save them on the current data.
Comrade, your final word this week, please.
The National Party is making it worse and people can feel that. And there's a real sense of urgency out there for those issues that the National Party talked a big game on in the election campaign, like prioritising the cost of living, and yet the food prices are still going up. Power prices are getting restrictive. People are making choices. And at the same time, we're seeing a rise in homelessness. It couldn't be more necessary to exercise the votes that we have in Tamaki Makaurau right now in the by-election for someone who can stick it to this government on behalf of Aucklanders. And it's also really important that we get whānau involved in voting now.
Preach.
So that next year, when it is harder to vote because National have changed the law,
Right.
that we are ready to go.
Preach. Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, I have a dream that one day the political left in Aotearoa, New Zealand, can sort their shit out enough to see that there is more common ground between us than the narcissism of petty policy difference. I dream this summer that the Labour, Greens and Māori Party can meet for an early election year hui to present a united front that includes an individualised electorate voting strategy to maximise MMP and agreed basic policy platform. For the love of the risen baby Jesus, this anti-Māori, anti-treaty, anti-worker, anti-renter, anti-beneficiary, anti-disability, anti-environment government is too dangerous to hand a second term to. But it's not enough to win through apathy. The left needs an electorate mandate from the people to make the transformational change we all voted Jacinda in to achieve. We are all still waiting for that transformative change Jacinda promised us in 2017. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News.